Hey guys, Mason Marangella here, the Rig Doctor. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're a returning subscriber or viewer, welcome back. Today I'm very excited to talk to you about something that we've been teasing out for a long time. I know some of you have been a little irritated with me, maybe teasing it a little bit too far in advance. We are finally ready to release our brand new pedal boards. Now these pedal boards I've been designing for years. Literally you can see the beginnings of these sorts of pedal boards when I built a rig for Rhett Shull and what he dubbed the Strymon Bridge. But we've done a lot of things since then to improve them, to add hinges to them so that they can essentially be movable up and down like a hinge on a door, and you can have your Strymon Bridge and get access to the things underneath it, which was previously something that we couldn't do. I've taken your feedback, I've listened to what you've said, the things that you've told me in our videos, the things that you'd like to see, and I've really tried to take all that information and implement it into something that not only is a great pedal board, but something that is going to be a big space saver for you. We designed our pedal boards in a way that allows you to double the surface area of your pedal board, and in many cases allowing you to put a lot of extra pedals that you couldn't normally fit on something with the same dimensions, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. Now before I get into some of the quick housekeeping stuff that I got to get through, you can skip forward to the part where I start getting into the pedal board build and some of the benefits of our pedal board by looking at the timestamp below. But if you're still hanging out with us here, there's a few announcements I'd like you to know about. Firstly, we have a podcast, the Rig Doctor podcast. It's on Apple and all the big podcatchers out there, so I highly recommend you check it out if you want to get even more information like what we're doing here with some special guests, famous guitar players, and all sorts of cool stuff that I think you're really gonna dig. The other thing I want you to know about is that we have merch. If you're watching this video, presumably right below where you're seeing me speak, you see offerings for our t-shirts, 100% cotton, best quality out there. You can get those shipped directly to you, so do check that out. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is we have a Patreon page now, meaning that you can get one-to-one coaching with me, the Rig Doctor, on your exact rig. We do that through Skype, through Zoom, through FaceTime. So these are options that are available to you. If you're interested in doing that, go check out our Patreon page. So without further ado, I'm gonna bring you my pedal boards. We're gonna go through a rig that I just built for my good buddy Brent. It turned out great, and we got to use one of the brand new Tour Elite pedal boards that I have, 29 by 15 inches. It turned out great. So follow us there. Let's see how this rig came together, and let's check out our new pedal boards. My name is Mason Marangella. I build rigs for the industry's top professionals. Now I'm teaching guitarists how to build rigs like the pros with DIY tips, easy mods, and all the tricks of the trade. I am the Rig Doctor. This video is supposed to be about maximizing your pedal board, but a lot of us have a difficult time doing this because we have so many pedals that we like, so many pedals that we want, and we don't have the room for it. And for most of the pedal boards that are out there, if you see a published dimension that's 10 by 20 or 20 by 30 or 30 by 40, those are the parameters that you have to work with. You have to keep the pedals within that dimension in order to make them workable for the system. One of the things that we try to do in the rigs that we're building is to add extra space even within the confines of those dimensions. And the only way you can do that is by building up. It's going to allow you to add more pedals. It's going to allow you to have switchers, volume pedals, expression pedals, wahs, all that stuff, and being able to put it in the smallest, most compact, reliable pedal board platform that's out there. Now, what kind of pedal boards are out there already? What is the stuff that most of us are buying if we're going to a guitar store and we're looking for a pedal board? To my knowledge, most of the guys that are manufacturing pedal boards aren't actually pedal board builders. They're enthusiasts, but to my knowledge, none of them are building rigs on a professional level. Well, I guess exception to Dave Friedman, who does have a really cool pedal board system that you can buy on his website that's made by Boutique Amp Distribution, the manufacturers of all the Friedman amps, pedals, and accessories. Those are pretty cool. I got to give it to them, so definitely check those out. Now we're going to talk about some of these manufacturers and look at some of the pros and cons and kind of compare that to what we're bringing to the table. This is not to say that our pedal board is going to meet everybody's needs, because we're going to talk about the cons of our pedal board as well as the pros. So you're going to kind of see this in terms of price, size, weight, and kind of comparing an equivalent pedal board from us compared to some of the big manufacturers that are out there. So let's look at that. Now, as I said before, our pedal boards aren't going to be for everybody. In fact, there's going to be people that just want to have pedal boards that come to them ready to assemble, that come with the Velcro, come with the gig bag, and all the stuff that they need in order to kind of get themselves going. My pedal board's probably not for them. However, for the people that really want something that is the absolutely best made product possible, that is built for pros by professional rig builders, I think you're going to see that there's a lot of assets to investing in a Vertex pedal board system. And we're going to be looking at the Tour Elite size pedal board, which is 29 by 15, and kind of seeing how that might stack up against some of the other types of pedal boards that are out there. One of the biggest pros of our pedal board is that it's made in the USA, right here in California, and it has a lifetime warranty. So if anything ever happens to this, the metal bends, anything goes wrong, you know that it will be replaced at no charge. It is completely under warranty. The second thing, as I mentioned before, if you are a musician or you're taking this anywhere outside of your home, these are all made to be in compliance with the FAA regulations, TSA regulations, and ATA regulations. The other thing that's really cool about all of our pedal board systems is we have 4 different platform sizes and we have 10 different riser sizes, and they're all compatible so long as you don't exceed the actual size of the pedal board. In other words, if you have a riser for a 15 by 29 pedal board and you try to fit that on one that's 11 by 20, that's not going to work. But for the most part, as long as you're not trying to exceed the overall size of the pedal board, you'll be able to interchange these. And with each pedal board, we have multiple different options to get different size risers that will actually ship with the pedal board themselves. You can also buy the risers separately if you already have a pre-existing flat pedal board that you want to mount these to. We'll also sell the pedal board surfaces if you just want the flat surface, if you already have another type of riser, or maybe you don't need it and you just want a really lightweight, high quality pedal board. Now to some of the drawbacks of our pedal board. Firstly, it doesn't come with a case. So we've listed the cases that are compatible with this, but the reason why we did that is because a lot of the cases create a pretty big upcharge for the customer when you're buying them from other companies, and most of the ones that are included with the pedal boards that we found are actually pretty inferior to the quality of a case manufacturer like SKB, Pelican, or Gator. These companies have made their living on making the best quality cases in the business, and we didn't think that we could make a case that would compete with what they have. So we've listed those for you, but I know for some of you who want that included, that is not something that we're offering with the pedal boards. Secondly, we're more expensive than some of the pedal board manufacturers. We're making everything in the USA. Most of the commercially available pedal boards, whether it's Pedal Train or some of the other similar ones, are made overseas in China, and so they have much cheaper labor costs, much cheaper material costs. But I noticed that many of them do not include lifetime warranties, or their lifetime warranties are limited to certain technicalities. Lastly, we don't have any sort of module. I noticed on a lot of the pedal boards, like the Temple Audio boards and the Rock boards by Warwick, they include modules that you can purchase either separately or come with the pedal board themselves to give you buffers and power supplies that can actually mount to the pedal board itself. We're not including anything like that. The main reason why is because I feel that there are superior individual products, and we offer a lot of tutorials on how to DIY your own interfaces and modules and things like that that you could put anywhere on the pedal board. We're going to show you how to make those yourselves, and we're going to show you where to purchase the right ones if you want to buy a prefab one, and how to put it on your pedal board based on the pedals that you actually have. Now, I know what some of you are already thinking. You've seen this hinged riser tier thing before, and I need to give credit where credit's due. Schmidt was the first that I've seen to come up with a pedal board system that was commercially available that used any sort of hinge or tiered riser, and they are excellently built. I've seen several of them, and the quality is definitely there. The differentiator I can identify between our two pedal boards is the weight. Ours are much lighter, being that they're made out of aluminum. And the second thing is the price. But I want to acknowledge that they are great and they are really excellently built. And if you were considering one, I think it is one of the top contenders if you need to have a tiered system like we're showing today. Now for our rig, I want to talk about a couple of the cool things that we featured on this rig. First off, we set our risers to have legs that would allow you to customize them by drilling into them, adding jacks and things like that. One thing that we did is we added 9-volt jacks on one side of the pedal board so that we were able to have a little bit more flexibility of the things that we used outside of the hinge or the tier. If we wanted to adjust different types of effects, different lengths of the power cables. We could do that very easily because we wouldn't have to route them all the way back to the power supply. Equally with the power supplies, we combined two Chalks power supplies and we drilled a hole for a power con, basically taking the IEC cable that's coming out of the Chalk supply and then putting that through the actual leg of the hinged riser, just so it kind of keeps things out of the way, makes it nice and clean. And because of the orientation of the IEC jack on the Chalks, it's a little cleaner to do it out of the side as opposed to going out of the back of the pedal board. If you had a different type power supply like Strymon or something like that, this may not be totally necessary, but you have a lot of surface area if you want to add jacks, whether that's, you know, a standard Neutrik enclosed jack or some of the D series jacks that are made by Neutrik and Switchcraft. The other cool thing about this board is we have a wet-dry system using the collider delay and reverb. This is one of the coolest and easiest pedals to do a wet-dry or wet-dry-wet system with it because it already meets the criteria necessary for a wet-dry system in and of itself. It has its own internal mixer so that you can run the delay and reverb in parallel. It has a kill-dry mode, and you can run the pedals 100% wet, and it has an analog dry-through. So what I've done in this board is I've actually created 4 identical presets, 4 that are designed for wet-dry, and the other 4 that are designed for series, because I've made it on the interface, so if you plug into only the input and the return, that you'll get everything in front of one amp. But if you plug into the input, the dry out, the line in, and the wet out to the power amp, it routes everything as a wet-dry system. Another cool thing I did was a mod to the Analog Man sun face. Guys like Zapata and my good buddy RJ Ronquillo often use fuzzes and wahs, and they like the way that those sound on batteries. So what I did here is something similar to them, except I mounted a battery clip made by Keystone and I riveted it to the top of the pedal board and added a power jack to the side of the Analog Man fuzz so that you actually change the battery externally. You don't have to open it up as you did before, you know, in the original stock sense. The other cool thing the Analog Man did to this, I didn't do it, is it has an on-off on the actual fuzz control on it, so you can actually kill the battery by just turning it fully counterclockwise. Again, I recommend using rivets if you want to do this because screws will sit up a little bit too high and it won't hold the battery very well. So just a tip if you're going to do that on your own. Another cool thing I did here is I used RCA jacks that were made by Switchcraft to customize all the Chalks cables. Now, the Chalks cables, although they're perfectly fine, I don't really like how they route, so I actually use Strymon DC connectors and then I terminated them with RCAs on the sides that go into the Chalks. Now, one thing about this, I've given some power supply tutorials on RCA cables where the positive and negative are comparatively to how we would do it if we were doing a standard 2.1 millimeter barrel are reversed. So if you're looking and referencing any of my power cable tutorials, you're going to want to reverse where the red and black wire are on the Strymon power cables. Another thing we did here is a true bypass to the wah. I know that that doesn't have anything to do with the pedal board, but I just thought it'd be a cool mention. This wah actually is an early 90s crybaby, and I have to say it actually sounds really, really great. Another thing we did is we added a 2.1 millimeter barrel connector to the Demeter compulator. This is just to make it a little bit easier, so if another compressor was going to go in its place at a future time, you wouldn't have to rip out, you know, the power supply cable because the original one had an 1/8 inch jack. So this way it just keeps it kind of uniform with everything else. Another thing that we did, which is a common thing that a lot of people with switchers run into, is a lot of the relay switch stuff and a lot of the non-true bypass stuff has a problem when you fire it up. When you fire up your rack or you fire up your switcher like this, a lot of that defaults to being in the off position, which kind of sucks if you have to, every time you got to open up your pedal board, you got to turn everything on. So what we did on that one and also on the POG, we made it so that it always defaults to the on position, so you never have to go in and turn stuff on. Everything by default turns on that's in the switcher, and then that way, you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, turning on one of your loops and not having the pedal come on because it was never turned on when you first fired up your pedal board. The last thing we did is we actually changed the value of the input buffer on the RJM. One thing I've said in the past is one of my criticisms of the RJM is that it has a 500K input impedance. We actually had a little issue when I received the RJM that some of the jacks were a little bit loose, and so I went to tighten them up a little bit, and I thought, man, at the same time I'll just look and see what's going on there, and just by changing one of the resistor values you're actually able to change the input buffer to 1 meg. I checked with Ron, the manufacturer of the RJM PBC10. He said it was absolutely fine to do that. So I did that, and I just prefer that for the input buffer to have a nice solid 1 meg input impedance. The other two buffers are still at 500, but again, they're not dealing with the pickup loading. That's the place where I really want to make sure that we have the 1 meg so that our pickups are seeing what they're used to seeing when we plug into a regular amplifier like a Fender or a Marshall. So how are we getting the wet, dry, wet using the source audio collider? What we're doing first is we're going out of the dry, and the dry is basically all the pedals that are in the switcher that are in front of the amp, and goes into the input, in this case, to the front of my super reverb. From the super reverb, we're connecting the speaker cabinet and the head into the speaker through of a SUR line out box. We're taking a line level out into the line in on the interface box, which feeds the input of the collider. From the output of the collider, we have the wet out that is going into the input of the Hot Rod DeVille. Now, if I didn't want to use a Hot Rod DeVille because I didn't want to haul around another amp, I could use something like the Mono Cab Zeus, and I have a 9-volt through here, so I could feed a pedal like this or whatever I wanted, and I can go balanced out of this into my DAW or front of house. This is the easiest way to do wet, dry, wet, and I'm turning it on and off via MIDI, so it doesn't need to be occupying one of the loops. And I also have one other feature, whereas if I want to go all pedals in front of the amp, including the collider, I can just unplug the line level side, plug into the wet, and that's all going to put everything in front of the super reverb. Now, with all these cool mods, you might be asking yourself, well, how does this thing even sound? You know, we're doing all this work, we're routing all these cables, we got this giant system. Well, I demoed it for you. Now, admittedly, I'm not as good as some of the guys that we bring on here for a lot of our demos, but being that we're in COVID and we have limited access to being able to bring in people outside to do our demonstrations, you're gonna have to suffer through me. I'm gonna do a little bit of clean, kind of setting up one of the kind of more LA studio tone slash kind of Eric Johnson kind of ethereal patches, and then I'm gonna switch to using a humbucking guitar instead of a Strat as I used in the first clip, to going to something that's a little bit more overdriven, using the Ultraphonics and the steel string together with a humbucking pickup with the David Grissom PRS. So you can kind of hear two different sounds that I'm getting out of it that I think are really going to lend well to what the end user is going to be using in kind of some of the tones that he's trying to go for in his rig. So let's hear that. Now today, the point of our whole conversation is really about how do you maximize the space on your pedal board. Well, We have our pedal board here, and as we talked about, the only way that you can make more room out of a fixed size is by going up. Don't just take my word for it. Let's see what it looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape out the size of this pedal board with some blue painter's tape, and you're going to see that size. I'm going to tape out the size of the switcher because I don't really want to take it off the whole board. And then I'm just going to try to put equivalent size pedals down in the same area and see how much larger it's going to be. As I mentioned before, this board would have to be 30% bigger in order to accommodate all the pedals that we put on it if you weren't using the tiered system. So in other words, this is allowing us to duplicate space without having to get wider or deeper in order to accommodate the extra effects. So as you can see here, there's no way that you could be able to fit this many pedals in on this space. You don't even have the room to be able to add any jacks on the back of the RGM PBC. You're not allowing any space for that. And we really didn't even see what happens if we actually put physical jacks in the pedals themselves, the 1/4-inch jacks and the power jacks, to see how much more that's going to spread them. We easily added a couple of inches to the depth because we needed to expand and add another row of pedals in order to do this. We had to move the fuzz from next to the expression, the wah pedal, in order to make sure that there was enough clearance there, because remember, the wah pedal has a taper, but an Ernie Ball volume pedal, or almost any other volume pedal, has no taper on the actual enclosure. It goes straight back, so that dimension is going to block out our DC jack on the fuzz, so we got to move that to make another row. We have to go deeper in order to allow for any sort of cable routing in and between the pedals and coming out of the PVC 10. I mean, and even so, like this, it's going to be a monster to wire unless you go up. And so this is part of why I'm saying, whether you're using one of our systems or you're buying one of the individual hinge risers from us, or you're going to our friends at Fix Pedalboards, who are actually the manufacturers of our pedal boards, and you're buying one of the Strymon bridges from them, that's really the only way you're going to be able to maximize your pedalboard space. If you want to get all the latest and greatest information about when these are going to be releasing, which is any day now, I highly recommend that you sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be the first to know when we release the pedal boards. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor. See ya. All right.
How's it going?
Maiden voyage.
Made it.
All right, let's see.
Monster. It's alive.
Yeah. Oh, it's so clean.
I love it. Man, you do some nice work. So beautiful. Oh, wow, cool. Nice.
It works.
It works super good. Good work.